She was still breathing when he found her barely. Her fingers were wrapped around a folded letter so tightly that even half-conscious she would not let go. Blood had dried across her temple. Her lips were cracked, her dress torn at the shoulder. She had not eaten in at least 2 days. Wyatt Callahan crouched down beside her in that dark, forgotten cabin and did the one thing he swore he would never do again. He stayed. And somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, the men who had left her for dead were already riding back to finish the job. If this story already has your heart beating faster, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single chapter. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what happens next will stay with you long after it's over. The summer of 1882 had been cruel to the Colorado mountains, and nobody felt that cruelty more quietly than Wyatt Callahan. He had not spoken to another living soul in 11 days. He knew because he counted, not out of loneliness or so he told himself, but out of habit. The kind of habit a man builds when he has decided with great deliberate care that the world is better off without his participation in it. His cabin sat at the northern edge of a pine ridge so remote that even the most determined land surveyors had turned back before reaching it. That was the point. Wyatt had chosen this place the same way a wounded animal chooses a den, not for comfort, but for distance. Distance from towns. Distance from noise. Distance from the particular kind of pain that comes from caring about people who eventually leave or die, or simply stop needing you. He was 41 years old. He had the hands of a man who had spent 20 years working cattle, splitting wood, and repairing things that other people had broken. His face carried the kind of lines that come not just from sun and wind, but from long years of holding an expression, still a face trained not to show what was happening underneath. Most people who passed through the region, and very few did, described Wyatt Callahan as a cold man, a hard man. A man who would give you directions if you asked, but would not invite you inside. A man who kept his word on a handshake, but never extended the hand first. That reputation suited him perfectly. He was returning from the eastern pasture that evening when his horse stopped. Rio, a dark bay gelding with an old scar across his left foreleg, and more sense than most men, Wyatt had known, stopped dead on the trail and would not move. His ears came forward. His nostrils flared. He shifted his weight to the left and turned his head slightly toward the tree line, the way he always did when something in the dark did not belong. "Easy," Wyatt said. He did not reach for his rifle, not yet. He sat still in the saddle and listened the way the mountains had taught him to listen, not just with his ears, but with the whole of himself, reading the silence for what it was trying to say. Wind in the upper pines. The creak of a branch somewhere to the north. The distant rush of the creek that ran below the east ridge. And underneath all of that so faint that he might have imagined it a sound that had no business being this far from town. A door. A door hanging open on broken hinges, tapping in the wind. Wyatt had walked every trail and hollow within 10 miles of his cabin for 12 years. There was no door in that direction. There was nothing in that direction but old-growth timber and rockfall, and the kind of wilderness that made men humble fast. He let Rio pick his way off the trail through the underbrush, ducking low branches in the gathering dark, until the shape of something solid appeared between the trees. A structure small and nearly swallowed by years of creeping pine and overgrown brush, set so far back from any path that it had simply ceased to exist in anyone's awareness. The walls were hand-hewn logs dark with age. The roof had partially collapsed on the eastern side. The door, what was left of it, hung at an angle on one remaining hinge and knocked against the frame with each gust. Wyatt dismounted. He looped Rio's reins around a low branch and moved to the doorway. The smell reached him before his eyes adjusted. Blood. Not fresh, but not old enough. The smell of something that had happened recently and badly. "Hello," he said. Nothing moved. Then a breath. Shallow and uneven, but unmistakably human. He stepped inside. She was on the floor against the far wall, half sitting with her back against the logs. her knees drawn up and her arms crossed over her chest, as if she had arranged herself carefully before losing consciousness. One side of her face was darkened with dried blood from a cut at her temple. Her hair, dark and long and badly tangled, had come loose and fallen across her shoulder. Her dress was a pale green that had been expensive once. Now it was torn at the shoulder seam, filthy at the hem, and wet at the sleeve in a way that told him the arm beneath it had bled through. She was still holding a piece of paper, folded twice, clutched against her chest with both hands. Wyatt crouched down. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat and felt a pulse too fast, too light, but present. He looked at her face. Young. Mid-20s maybe. No one he recognized. And he knew most everyone within 60 miles, even if only by description. "Miss," he said, her eyes opened. They were brown. Dark brown, and for a moment completely unfocused, the eyes of someone surfacing from a depth they hadn't expected to come back from. Then something sharp came into them. Fear. The very immediate, very specific kind of fear that comes from waking up and finding a stranger crouched over you in the dark. She jerked backward, which was the wrong move. Her shoulder hit the wall, and the pain from that arm went across her face like a flash of lightning. "Hey," Wyatt said. He held both hands up, palms open, and did not move. "I'm not going to hurt you. I heard the door. I came to look. That's all." She stared at him. Her breathing was ragged. Her hands had tightened around the paper against her chest. "Where?" Her voice came out wrong, scraped dry and too small. She swallowed and tried again. "Where am I?" "About 9 miles north of Ridgecrest, Colorado territory." He kept his hands where she could see them. "My cabin's another half-mile up the ridge. You're on my land, technically. What happened to you?" She did not answer. She looked at the doorway behind him, then back at his face, calculating something, deciding whether he was the kind of danger she already knew or a new kind she hadn't accounted for. "Miss," he said again, "that arm needs looking at, and you haven't eaten in a while by the look of it. I'm not asking you to trust me entirely. I'm just asking you to let me help you get somewhere warm." "I can't." She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked at the paper in her hands. "I can't leave. Not yet. I have to wait." "Wait for what?" She didn't answer. Wyatt studied her for a moment. Then he sat back on his heels and did something that surprised even himself. He waited. He did not push. He did not reach for her. He simply sat in that rotting cold cabin in the growing dark and waited with the patience of a man who had nothing waiting for him anywhere else. After a long time, she spoke. "I'm Clara," she said. "Clara Bennett." "Wyatt Callahan." She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not recognition exactly, but something adjacent to it, as if the name had landed somewhere familiar. "From the North Ridge?" she asked. He frowned slightly. "You know of me?" "My father did." Her voice was getting steadier, which told him she was stronger than she looked. "He said if anything ever happened to him, there was one man in this part of Colorado who couldn't be bought." She held his gaze directly, and there was something in that look, something careful and measuring, that told him this woman had been in rooms with liars and had learned to read faces the way some people read maps. "He said that man was you." Wyatt did not say anything for a moment. "Your father," he said. "Who was he?" "Thomas Bennett." She watched him. He owned the Bennett water property, the spring land up near the Elk Creek Basin. Wyatt knew the name. He knew it the way anyone who had spent time in this part of the territory knew it, a man who had homesteaded one of the most valuable water sources in the region 20 years ago and had built something solid and decent on top of it. A fair man. The kind of man other men spoke of with an unusual degree of respect. "He passed," Wyatt said. It was not a question. Clara's jaw tightened. 3 weeks ago. She said it the way people say things they have had to say too many times already, each repetition removing one more layer of protection. "They're calling it a heart attack." "You're not calling it that." "No," she said. "I'm not." The wind picked up outside. The broken door knocked against its frame twice in quick succession. Rio shifted his weight out in the dark and exhaled loud enough to be heard inside. Clara's eyes went to the doorway. "There were men following me," she said. "4 of them. I lost them at the river crossing this afternoon. I crossed upstream where the current was high enough to break a trail. But they'll find me eventually." Her voice was steady, but her hands had tightened around that paper again. "They always do." "Who are they?" "Men working for Victor Harrington." The name settled in the cabin like something with weight. Wyatt knew Victor Harrington the way everyone in the Colorado Territory knew him, not personally, but by the shadow he cast. Harrington had arrived in the region 4 years ago with Eastern money and Eastern intentions, and had spent every year since expanding both. He owned 2 banks, a freight operation, and controlling interests in more town councils than anyone had managed to prove in writing. He was the kind of man who never appeared directly in anything dangerous. There were always layers between Harrington and any given act of cruelty. But the cruelty was always eventually traceable back to him if you were willing to dig long enough. Most people weren't willing to dig. The ones who started usually found reasons to stop. "What does Harrington want with your father's land?" Wyatt asked, though he suspected he already knew. "The water," Clara said. "The spring on the east parcel feeds 6 downstream properties. Whoever controls that spring controls the water rights for 100 square miles of grazing land. My father had deeds going back to 1861, signed by the territorial governor. Perfectly clear." She paused. 2 days after he died, a lawyer arrived at the house with documents claiming the land had been sold to a holding company 3 years ago. Said my father had signed over the deed voluntarily. Had he? She looked at him with the particular flat patience of someone who has been asked the obvious question one too many times and has decided to answer it anyway. My father would sooner have sold his right hand. He built that land from nothing. He talked about it the way other men talk about their children. Her voice dropped slightly. He talked about it the way he talked about me. Wyatt was quiet. The signature on the document is a forgery, Clara continued. I know my father's handwriting. I grew up watching him write the way he held a pen, the slant he used, the particular way he made a capital B. Whoever forged it was skilled, but they didn't know him. They didn't know the small things. She pressed her lips together. There are also records missing. Tax payments, correspondence with the territorial land office letters between my father and his solicitor in Denver. Someone has been systematically removing documents from the county courthouse. Not destroying them, removing them, hiding them somewhere. How do you know they weren't destroyed? Because my father kept copies. For the first time, something that was almost defiance entered her expression. He was a careful man. Careful and precise, and he trusted no single record to survive alone. He kept his own ledgers, his own copies of every transaction. And before he died, before whatever they did to him, he sent me a letter. Her hands shifted on the paper against her chest. He told me where. Wyatt looked at the paper. That's it. Part of it. She did not offer to show him. Not yet. The rest I have to find. And Harrington's men know about the letter. They took the house apart looking for it. I got out with what I had, and I've been running for 9 days. She said it without self-pity. Simply. The way a person reports facts when self-pity is a luxury they can't currently afford. I knew where this cabin was. My father used to hunt near here. He mentioned it once, said it was the kind of place a person could disappear into if they needed to. She looked around the ruined walls with something almost like exhausted affection. He was right. Wyatt stood up. His knees made the sound they always made now when he rose from a crouch, a sound he privately resented. He looked at her for a moment in the dark. You need that arm cleaned, he said. And you need to eat something and sleep somewhere that isn't a dirt floor. I can offer you all 3. I can also offer you a bar on the door and a rifle inside it, if that helps the decision. Clara looked up at him. And what do you want in exchange? Nothing. She shook her head slightly. Nobody does something for nothing. Miss Bennett, Wyatt said. I'm 41 years old. I live alone on a mountain, and the last conversation I had with another human being was 11 days ago. I want to help you because letting you stay on that floor all night is something I'm not able to do and still call myself a man." He picked up his hat from where it had fallen when he crouched. "That's the whole of it." She studied him for a long moment. The measuring look again, reading his face the way she'd learned to read faces. Then she extended her hand. He helped her up. She was lighter than she looked, but steadier on her feet than he expected. When she swayed once, she caught herself before he could reach out, which told him something important about her. He helped her to Rio. She did not complain about the blood on her arm or the pain that crossed her face when she reached for the saddle, but he saw it. He walked Rio slowly through the dark timber, keeping to the smoothest ground, and said nothing, because she did not seem to want talk, and he had no gift for it anyway. The cabin was warm. He had banked the fire before leaving that afternoon. He helped her to the chair nearest the hearth and set water to heat without being asked, and got his medical kit from the shelf, a battered tin box that he kept cleaner than anything else he owned, and knelt beside her to look at the arm. The wound was a cut long and shallow from something with an edge, a knife possibly, or the corner of something metal. It had bled significantly, but had not gone deep. He cleaned it with carbolic and bandaged it with the efficiency of a man who had patched his own injuries many times and other people's injuries a few. She did not make a sound throughout. When he was finished, she looked at the bandage and then at his face and said, "Thank you. Don't mention it." He heated soup from the pot he kept on the back of the stove, venison with root vegetables, the kind of thing he made once a week, and ate alone across 3 days. He handed her a bowl, and she took it with both hands and ate with the careful restraint of someone who knows eating too fast. After too long will make them sick. She ate half the bowl. Then she set it on the floor beside her and looked into the fire. "I need to get to the county seat," she said. "Harrington has men watching every road, and I need someone who knows the mountain routes." Wyatt sat down on the opposite side of the fire. He had a cup of coffee. He looked at it. "Miss Bennett. Clara. Clara." He turned the cup in his hands. "I'm just a cowboy. I fix fences. I keep cattle. I don't fight rich men." "You fought the Delacroix brothers," she said. He looked up. "My father mentioned that too," she said quietly. 3 years ago, when they were trying to push the Garfield family off their homestead. He said Wyatt Callahan was the only man in 100 miles who stood up and said no. That was different. Was it? Wyatt did not answer. "They're going to come here," Clara said. She said it simply without drama. "Whether you help me or not. They saw Rio's tracks, I expect. Or they'll find the cabin where they lost me and look for the nearest shelter. They know this mountain. Men like Harrington pay people to know things." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to fight anyone. I'm asking you to show me the mountain routes to Ridgecrest. I can do the rest." The rest being what exactly? Walk into the county courthouse and ask nicely for justice. No. Something in her voice hardened just slightly, just enough to reveal the edge beneath the exhaustion. "I'm going to expose everything. Harrington's forgeries, the stolen documents, what happened to my father, all of it." She leaned forward slightly. "My father's letter mentions a man in Denver, a federal land inspector named Cole Aldridge, who had already begun an investigation into Harrington's land acquisitions. If I can get to a telegraph, I can reach him. If he has what my father sent him, combined with what I have." She touched the paper at her chest. "There won't be enough money in the Colorado Territory to make this go away." Wyatt looked at her. She looked back. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind had risen, and the pines were moving with a sound like distant water, and somewhere much closer, a horse shied at something in the dark. Not Rio. Rio was in the barn. Wyatt had put him there 15 minutes ago. They both heard it. Clara went very still. Wyatt set his coffee cup down on the floor beside his chair without making a sound. He stood up slowly. He took his rifle from the wall mount beside the door with the unhurried care of a man who has practiced the motion often enough that it requires no thought. He looked at Clara. He nodded once toward the back wall, toward the second door. The one that led to the small storage room cut into the hillside, the room with no window and a bolt on the inside. She understood. She stood without a word, picked up the paper from the floor beside her chair, and moved toward the back of the cabin. At the door she stopped. She turned back. In the firelight, her face was bruised and tired, and something else, something that had not been there when he first found her on that dirt floor. Resolve, maybe. Or the particular kind of recognition that happens when a person realizes for the first time in a very long while that they might not be completely alone. "Wyatt," she said. He had his hand on the front door. He looked back at her over his shoulder. "I know you said you don't fight rich men," she said. "But you stayed. When you found me, you could have walked away. You stayed." Her voice was quiet. "Whatever you decide tonight, I want you to know that meant something to me." He did not answer. He was not a man built for the kind of thing that ought to be said in that moment. But something moved across his face so quickly that she might have missed it. And then he turned back to the door and he stepped outside into the dark. There were two of them. He could hear them before he saw them, the particular sound of men moving through timber at night, who are trying to be quiet and aren't quite managing it. They came from the south side of the ridge, from the direction of the old trail that connected this part of the mountain to the lower road. Men who knew the territory or had a guide who did. They came out of the trees about 30 yards from the cabin with their horses at a walk, and their rifles across their saddles, and the easy manner of men who expected no resistance. "Evening," said the first one. Big, heavy through the shoulders, a hat pulled low. "This your place?" "It is," Wyatt said. "We're looking for a woman, traveling alone. Brown hair, green dress. Might have been injured." "Haven't seen anyone." The second man, smaller and watchful in the way of someone paid to notice things, had been scanning the cabin since they stopped. His eyes went to the window, then back to Wyatt. "You sure about that?" the big man said. "I'm sure." "Mind if we take a look around?" "I do mind," Wyatt said. "This is my property. You're standing on it uninvited at 10 o'clock at night. I've answered your question. I'd suggest you take that answer and ride." The big man smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Mr. Harrington would compensate you generously for any—" "I don't work for Harrington," Wyatt said. "I don't work for anyone, and I won't say it a third time." The big man looked at the smaller man. The smaller man looked at Wyatt. A calculation passed between them, the kind of calculation that men like these make quickly and with some experience, weighing the odds. Reading the stance, deciding whether this was a man who would actually use the rifle or a man who was bluffing. Wyatt Callahan was not bluffing, and after a moment, both men seemed to arrive at that conclusion independently. The big man nodded slowly. "We'll be moving on then." He gathered his reins. "For tonight." The last two words were not a threat exactly. They were a statement of intention, delivered in the flattest, most matter-of-fact tone possible, which in Wyatt's experience was more alarming than a threat. He watched them ride back into the trees. He stood in the dark long after the sound of their horses faded, listening to the mountain settle back into itself. Then he went inside and knocked twice on the back room door. Clara came out. She looked at his face and did not ask what had happened. She didn't need to. "They'll come back," Wyatt said. "Yes," she said. "They will." He set the rifle against the wall. He picked up his coffee cup from the floor and looked into it. Cold now. For a long time he did not say anything. Clara sat back down in the chair by the fire and watched him and did not push. She had the same quality. He had the patience of someone who has learned that silence often says more than words, and that the important things are usually decided in it. Finally, Wyatt set the cup down. "The eastern mountain route bypasses every main road between here and Ridgecrest," he said. 2 days on horseback if we push. Less if we don't hit weather." He looked at the fire. "There's a telegraph station at the mining settlement above the East Pass. If your man Aldridge is who you say he is, we can reach him from there before we hit town." Clara was very still. "The route's rough." He continued in the same measured way he might have described a fence repair. "There are 2 river crossings that'll be high this time of year. Your arm is going to give you trouble by the second day. and Harrington's people will figure out the direction before we reach the pass." He finally looked at her. "We'll need to move before first light." Clara let out a breath. Just one, small and controlled. But he saw what it cost her to have been holding it, and he understood what it meant to release it. "Why?" she asked. And she did not ask it in the way of someone who doubted the answer. She asked it in the way of someone who needed to hear it said out loud. Wyatt considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because they came to my door tonight," he said. "And a man who lets that slide without consequence isn't a man I recognize." He reached for his hat on the wall peg. "And because your father—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Your father sounded like a decent man. And decent men don't often get what they're owed in this world." He looked at her steadily. "Every so often somebody ought to try and change that." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once with the deliberate, serious quality of a person who does not nod casually. "Before first light," she said. "Before first light," he confirmed. He gave her the cot in the back room. He set a lantern low on the shelf and a loaded pistol on the floor beside it, and told her the bar on the inside locked from both directions if she wedged it right. She thanked him without elaborate ceremony, which he appreciated. He took the chair by the front door and sat with his rifle across his knees and did not sleep. Outside the Colorado mountains held their silence, and somewhere below in the dark, two men who had been sent to do a job they had not yet finished were reporting back to someone with deep pockets and no conscience. And in the hidden cabin deep in the timber, a woman who had been running for 9 days held a letter against her chest and did not let go of it even in sleep. Wyatt Callahan sat in his chair by the door and stared into the fire and tried very hard to convince himself that this was simply the right thing to do. He did not try very hard to convince himself that it was the only reason. They were riding before the first gray light touched the peaks. Wyatt had packed lean and fast-dried meat hardtack, a canvas roll ammunition, the medical kit. He did not pack for comfort. He packed for distance. Clara came out of the back room with her father's letter tucked inside her dress against her skin, and he did not ask about it, and she did not explain it. Some things did not require discussion. She mounted without help. He noticed. He did not comment on it, but he noticed. They moved out from the cabin into the dark timber at a walk, Rio leading Clara on the spare mare, a gray named Dust that Wyatt kept for the kind of occasions that never used to arise and were suddenly arising. The pines swallowed them quickly. Within 20 minutes, the cabin was gone behind them, and there was nothing in any direction but mountain. Clara rode well. That surprised him, though it shouldn't have. A man who raised a daughter alone on a water property in the Colorado high country would have put her in a saddle before she could read. She kept pace without being told, read the terrain without asking, and when they crossed the first rocky stretch where the footing was treacherous and unpredictable, she gave Dust her head and let the horse find the way through. Wyatt watched that from the corner of his eye and revised his estimation of her upward. They did not speak for the first 2 hours. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people concentrating on the same problem from the same direction, which is a different thing entirely from the silence of people with nothing to say. When the sky began to lighten over the eastern ridges, they stopped to water the horses at a narrow stream that ran fast and clear over smooth stones. Clara climbed down and stood at the water's edge and flexed her bandaged arm experimentally, testing the range of movement, cataloging the pain the way someone does when they're deciding how much of it they can afford to ignore. "How bad?" Wyatt asked. "Manageable," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "It pulls when I extend fully. It's stiff. It won't stop me." She looked back at the water. "It won't stop me," she said again, quieter, and that second saying of it told him she was saying it partly to herself. "We'll rebandage at the next stop," he said. "There's a place I know half-mile below the East Ridge. Old line shack. We can stop long enough to eat and check the arm." She nodded. Then she said without looking up from the water, "Last night, those 2 men, they'll have reported back by now." "Yes." "Harrington will send more." "Yes." "How many more?" Wyatt considered it honestly. Depends on how badly he wants this settled quickly. He picked up his reins. And men like Harrington always want things settled quickly. Clara looked at him. You're not trying to frighten me. No, he said. I'm not. Good. She remounted in a single clean motion. Because I've been frightened for 9 days and I'm tired of it. I'd rather know what's coming. They rode on. The line shack appeared out of the timber just after sunrise, small, solid, and long empty. Wyatt had used it before as a waypoint when working cattle in the upper pastures. He kept a tin of supplies on the shelf inside and changed it out every spring. Not because he expected to need it, but because his father had taught him that a man who doesn't prepare for hard times is a man who hasn't lived through enough of them. He rebandaged Clara's arm while she sat on an upturned crate and ate hardtack and dried meat with methodical focus. The wound had not reopened, but the tissue around it was swollen and darker than he liked. He wrapped it tighter and said nothing beyond what was necessary. She did not wince or complain, but twice he felt her breathing change in the controlled way of someone redirecting pain elsewhere and waiting for it to pass. When he finished, she looked at the bandage, then at him. You've done this before, she said. Patched things up. Yes. Not just things, she said. People. He sat back. Some. Were you a doctor? No. He picked up his hat from the floor. Just someone who kept ending up in situations where nobody else was available. She chewed on that along with the hardtack. After a moment she said, My father's letter. You've been wondering what it says. That's your business. I know it is. She looked at him steadily. I'm choosing to make it yours as well. She reached inside her dress and produced the letter, the same folded paper she had held through unconsciousness and sleep and a night with armed men outside the door. She held it in both hands, but did not open it yet. He wrote it 6 days before he died. He posted it to my address in Denver. I was visiting my aunt, but he also gave a copy to his solicitor with instructions to hold it for 30 days before opening. That gives us time. If we can reach the federal inspector before Harrington learns about the solicitor, we have 2 sources confirming the same information. Smart man, Wyatt said. The smartest man I ever knew, Clara said. And the past tense of that hit the air between them with a weight she did not try to diminish. She opened the letter. Wyatt did not look at it. He was listening to the timber outside windbirds, the horses shifting and separating the ordinary sounds from the ones that did not belong. Old habit. Clara read silently, moving her lips slightly on some words, the way people do when reading something that matters enough to feel in the mouth. He names 3 properties, she said, besides ours. 3 other homesteads that Harrington acquired through the same method, forged signatures, removed records. Intimidation when the legal route didn't move fast enough. 2 families sold under pressure because they couldn't prove what was being done to them. 1 family. She stopped, pressed her lips together for a moment. 1 family didn't sell. Their house burned. Wyatt looked at her. No one was inside, she said. Officially it was ruled an accident. The Tanner family. You may know the name. He did. He knew it in the way you know the name of something that leaves a mark. The Tanners had been on their land for 12 years. They had left the territory shortly after the fire. He had heard the story told in pieces at various points, and had always felt the pieces added up to something that no one was saying out loud. Your father knew this, Wyatt said. He knew it for at least a year. Clara folded the letter carefully and returned it to its place against her chest. He was building a case, quietly, sending documents to Denver, making contact with Inspector Aldridge, keeping copies of everything. He was not a man who moved without evidence. Her voice caught slightly on that last word, not enough to break, but enough to reveal how much was being held back. He was careful because he knew what happened to people who weren't. And then he died. And then he died, she agreed. And they came for me within 48 hours. Wyatt stood. He moved to the door of the line shack and looked out at the morning light working its way down through the timber. The air was cold at this elevation, clear and cold, with the particular quality of high mountain mornings that felt like the world had been rinsed overnight and not quite finished drying. "The Tanner family," he said. "You know where they went. My father's letter does. A town called Mineral Springs in New Mexico Territory." "You'd want their testimony." "Inspector Aldridge would want their testimony," she corrected. "I'm just the woman trying to get him everything he needs." There was something in her voice, crisp and precise, that made him turn to look at her. She had stood up from the crate and was adjusting the way the bandage sat under her sleeve with her good hand, and the morning light fell across her face at an angle that showed him how young she was, and how tired, and also how completely and deliberately she had decided to be neither of those things right now. "I'm not naive enough to think I can walk into a courtroom and win this alone, but I'm also not willing to lie down and let them take what my father built." She met his eyes. "So I'm going to do exactly what he would have done. I'm going to document everything, find everyone they've wronged, and put it all in front of the one man in this territory who has the federal authority to do something about it." Wyatt held her gaze for a moment. Then he put on his hat and said, "We need to move." They were back in the saddle and climbing toward the east ridge when the sound reached them, not from behind, where he had been watching, but from the south. Below them, and moving parallel. Wyatt pulled up. Clara pulled up beside him. They sat in silence, listening. Hoofbeats. More than 2 horses. He counted the rhythm. 3, maybe 4 animals, moving fast on the lower trail, which ran roughly parallel to their route at a lower elevation. Not directly on their path, but angled in a direction that would intersect with it at the pass. "They know the pass route," Clara said quietly. "Somebody does," Wyatt agreed. "Somebody who knows this mountain." Harrington would have hired a guide, someone local. Wyatt thought about that. The number of people who knew the East Ridge route well enough to get ahead of them at the pass was not a large number. It was a smaller number than he liked. He turned it over in his mind while the sound of the riders below faded slightly and then steadied, tracking their direction. "We don't go through the pass," he said. Clara looked at him. "The telegraph station is at the pass settlement." "I know. We go above it." He turned Rio and started up a slope that did not have anything resembling a trail. "There's a way across the top of the ridge that nobody uses because it's steep enough to make most horses refuse and cold enough at the top to take your breath. But it comes out 2 miles west of the pass settlement, and if we push hard, we can be at the telegraph station before they figure out we didn't come through the main route." "How steep?" Clara said. He looked at her. "Steep. How cold?" "Cold." She looked at the slope. Then she looked back at him with an expression that was doing its level best to be unimpressed and nearly succeeding. "All right," she said. "Lead." He led. Rio found his way up through the loose shale and scrub, and Clara kept Dust close behind, talking to the mare in a low, continuous voice that was part instruction and part pure reassurance. The voice of someone who understood animals well enough to know that fear is contagious, and calmness, if you can manufacture it, convincingly enough, is too. Halfway up the slope, Dust slid on a patch of wet shale and went down to one knee. Clara stayed in the saddle with the reflexive balance of a born rider, shifted her weight back, gave the mare room to recover, and had them moving again in under 10 seconds without raising her voice or losing her line. Wyatt did not say anything, but he watched. The top of the ridge was everything he had promised. The wind up there was a physical thing, a solid pressing force that leaned into them from the west and made the horses pin their ears and tuck their noses. The cold was immediate and total. Clara pulled her coat tighter with one hand and kept her other on the reins and did not complain. He could see her breath and the horse's breath and his own, all 3 of them streaming sideways in the same direction. The view from the top, if either of them had been in a position to appreciate views, was the kind that people who had never seen it would not have believed. But neither of them was looking at it. Wyatt was watching the trail below for movement, and Clara had her eyes on the descent ahead, plotting the line her horse would need to take. "Down the north face," Wyatt said. "There's a switchback about 200 yards in. It'll look like the trail ends, but it doesn't. Keep left." "Got it," she said. "Clara." She looked at him. "If dust goes down again, let her go and hit the slope and slide. Don't fight it. The snow will stop you before the rocks." She looked at the descent, then back at him. "That's genuinely terrifying advice." "It's survived advice," he said. "There's a difference." She almost smiled. It was the first time he had seen her face do anything approximating that, and it did something unexpected to the air between them, a brief, small warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the reminder that they were in the middle of all this still human beings. "Keep left," she said, and she started down. The descent took the better part of an hour, and there were 4 separate moments during it that Wyatt filed under the category of things he would not be recounting to anyone. When they came out at the bottom on level ground in the timber west of the pass settlement, both horses were breathing hard, and both riders were colder than either would admit. Clara said nothing for a full minute. She simply sat on dust and breathed, and let her hands, which had been clenched hard on the reins, slowly open. Then she said, "Well, yes," Wyatt agreed. "Let's never do that again." Agreed. They looked at each other. Something had shifted between them on that ridge, the particular shift that happens between people who go through something difficult together and come out the other side intact. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but a change in the register of the silence. It no longer felt like the silence between strangers. The telegraph station at the pass settlement was a low building that served simultaneously as a post office, a supply depot, and an informal meeting hall for the miners and drovers who moved through the high country. The operator was a thin man of about 60, named Burl, who had worked this station for 9 years and had the patient, careful manner of someone accustomed to being the sole point of contact between isolated people and the rest of the world. He looked up when they came in and read their faces with the efficiency of a man who has seen a great many faces come through this door. "Help you." "I need to send a telegraph," Clara said. "Federal priority. Inspector Cole Aldridge, Land Division, Denver." Burl looked at her. He looked at Wyatt. He looked at Clara's bandaged arm, and her torn dress, and the set of her jaw. "You got a message ready?" "I have it in my head," she said. He settled in front of his key. "Go ahead." Clara dictated without hesitating. She had composed the message somewhere on the mountain. Wyatt understood had been composing it in the back of her mind while they rode and climbed and descended. She was precise and complete and wasted nothing. She named the properties. She named the method. She named Victor Harrington. She referenced her father's copies, the solicitor in Denver, the Tanner family in Mineral Springs. She listed what she had and where she was going. She gave the inspector a timeline and asked for a response to the Ridgecrest postal agent care of a name she seemed to trust there. When she finished, Burl looked up. "That's going to cost you." "I'm aware," she said. She reached into her coat and produced a small fold of bills, not much Wyatt could see, but enough for this, which suggested she had been rationing what she had with precision. She paid. Burl sent the message. They waited. The reply came 19 minutes later. Burl read it from the tape and handed it to Clara without expression. She read it. Something happened in her face, a fast and complicated sequence of things that she controlled quickly, but not before he saw all of them. "What does it say?" Wyatt asked. She handed it to him. "Message received. Stop investigation. Active. Stop. Do not approach Ridgecrest Courthouse. Stop. County Clerk. Morrison compromised. Stop. Proceed to Federal Surveyor Station, northwest of Ridgecrest. Stop. Hold position. Stop. Arriving within 48 hours. Stop. Aldridge." Wyatt read it twice. Then he looked at Clara. "The county clerk," he said. "Morrison," she said. "I was going to go directly to him. He was my father's first point of contact at the courthouse. I thought—" She stopped. "I thought he was on our side." Harrington got to him. Apparently. Wyatt thought about how that walk into the Ridgecrest courthouse would have gone if they'd arrived without this warning. How clean and quick the trap would have closed. How completely anything Clara had would have disappeared into whatever Harrington had built inside those walls. He thought about Victor Harrington, a man Wyatt had never met, had never needed to meet, had only known as a name attached to a particular kind of quiet ruin, and felt the dull specific anger of someone who recognizes the shape of predation and has spent years managing the desire to respond to it. Northwest Surveyor Station, he said. I know it, half-day's ride. We have 48 hours, Clara said. We have 48 hours, he confirmed. He handed the message back to her. She folded it with the same care she gave everything she considered valuable and put it inside her coat. But we don't reach the station directly. If Morrison is watching the roads, then he'll report movement toward the station. Yes. We'll approach from the north, through the Elk Creek Basin. Clara went very still. The Elk Creek Basin, she said, is my father's land. Wyatt looked at her. She absorbed this for a moment. The land they needed to cross to stay safe was the land that had been taken from her. The land that had started all of this. She was going to have to ride through it on her way to getting it back, and whatever that meant to her was visible in the careful, controlled way she was holding herself together right now. I know, she said finally. It's all right. I know that land better than any road. They were nearly out the door when Burl called after them. Hold on! They turned. The old telegraph operator had risen from his chair. He had the measured look of someone about to say something they've been weighing for the length of a conversation. Man came through here this morning, he said, early, before dawn, asking about trail routes east of the pass. He paused, asking specifically about a woman traveling with a man from the North Ridge. The air in the room changed. Description, Wyatt said. Said the woman had dark hair, injured arm. Burl met Wyatt's eyes. Said there'd be a reward for anyone who could point them in the right direction. He paused. I didn't point anyone anywhere. Why not? Clara asked. Burl looked at her with something that was almost paternal in its directness. Because my daughter's husband lost his homestead to a holding company 3 years ago, and I know exactly who was behind it. And because I was born in this territory, and I have lived here all my life, and I am tired, he said plainly, of watching men with money do whatever they please to people who built things honestly. He sat back down. You didn't come through here, far as I'm concerned. Wyatt looked at the old man for a moment. Thank you. Don't thank me, Burl said. Just make sure it counts. They rode out the northwest side of the settlement and into the timber without looking back. The morning had aged into something clear and cold and bright, and the mountains around them were indifferent in the way mountains always are, carrying on with their enormous unhurried existence, regardless of what the small, urgent creatures on their surface were choosing to do. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Clara said, How many people are there like Burl? Like the families Harrington took from? More than you'd think, Wyatt said. And they've all just... She stopped. They've all just accepted it. Most people aren't in a position to do otherwise, he said. You need evidence. You need someone with the authority to act on it. You need something to fight with that isn't just anger and righteousness, because anger and righteousness don't win in courtrooms. He guided Rio around a fallen trunk. Your father understood that. That's why he spent a year building a case instead of riding into Ridgecrest with a rifle. Clara was quiet for a moment. Is that what you wanted to do when you found out about the Garfield family? About what Delacroix was doing to them? He didn't answer immediately. Wyatt. Yes, he said. That's what I wanted to do. But you didn't. No. He looked straight ahead through the trees. I found a lawyer in Denver who owed me a favor, and I spent 3 weeks collecting signed statements from every family in the county who'd had a run-in with the Delacroix brothers, and I put it all in that lawyer's hands, and it took 8 months, but the Garfields kept their land. Clara rode in silence beside him for a while. And the lawyer who owed you a favor? What had you done for him? Pulled him out of a river, Wyatt said. 3 years before that, you pulled a man out of a river. He wasn't a lawyer then. He was just a man drowning in a river. Clara looked at him. He did not look back, but the corner of his mouth moved the faintest possible indication of something that might in better circumstances have been a smile. "Wyatt Callahan," she said, and the way she said it, quiet and considering, as if she were measuring the name against something she was only now beginning to understand, made him shift slightly in the saddle without quite knowing why. They were an hour into the Elk Creek Basin when Clara went quiet in a different way. Not the tactical silence of someone listening and thinking, but the silence of someone confronting something. Wyatt felt the change before he saw the cause of it, felt it in the way she drew her horse slightly closer to his without seeming to intend to. He looked where she was looking. The fence was new. Recent posts, raw wood still pale. Running across the basin floor in a line that had no precedent in the terrain, it was not following any natural boundary, not a ridgeline or a waterway. It was a line drawn by someone who wanted to mark something as theirs. The line went directly through the middle of what had been 2 months ago Thomas Bennett's land, and on the nearest post was a sign, painted in black on white board, neat and deliberate. Property of Harrington Land. Holdings Inc. Trespassers will be removed. Clara stopped dust. She sat very still and looked at the sign and did not say anything. Wyatt stopped Rio and looked at the sign and then at her face and said nothing either. After a long time she said, "He put up the fence before my father was in the ground." Wyatt looked at the posts. The wood was raw and unseasoned. "Before or right after?" "Before," she said. Her voice was doing the controlled thing again, the thing where everything was very flat and even because anything else would break it. He was already so certain. He was so completely certain that there was nothing we could do. She was looking at the sign, not at him. But he heard in her voice everything that the sign meant, not just the land, not just the legal battle, not just the 9 days of running and the injury and the exhaustion. He heard what it meant to have someone treat your father's death as a logistical step in a property acquisition. What it meant to see that certainty expressed in paint on a board. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, or not only with tears, but with something more concentrated than that. Something that had been building for 9 days and had just found a shape it could hold. "He's going to lose," she said, quietly. Absolutely. With the particular certainty of someone who has looked into the specific thing they are most afraid of and decided in that moment that they are more angry than afraid. "He put that sign up, and he hired those men, and he forged my father's name, and he is going to lose every single thing he thought he bought." Wyatt held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "He is." She looked at the sign one more moment. Then she turned dust away from it and urged the mare forward and did not look back. Wyatt followed. And he understood, watching her ride away from that fence without flinching, that the woman he had found on a dirt floor 2 days ago holding a piece of paper and barely breathing was not in any essential way the same woman riding through her father's stolen land right now. Something had happened between there and here. Not recovery exactly. She was still injured, still hunted, still fighting on too little sleep and too little food against a man with considerably more resources than she had. But something had settled in her. Some decision had been made somewhere in the cold and the climbing and the telegraph office and the sign on the post. A decision about what she was and what she was willing to do and how far she was willing to go. Wyatt had seen that look before. He had seen it in the mirror once a long time ago, when he had been deciding something similar. He knew what it meant. It meant she was not going to stop. He was glad of it. And something in that gladness surprised him in the quiet, off-guard way that something surprises you when you stopped expecting to feel it. They rode on through the basin as the afternoon light began to angle low and gold through the timber, and somewhere ahead of them, a federal inspector was already riding hard from Denver. And somewhere behind them, men with money and instructions were trying to close a net. And Wyatt Callahan, who had spent 12 years deciding that other people's fights were not his to carry, was riding toward the hardest thing he had chosen in years, with the particular feeling of a man who has stopped running in the opposite direction. He did not have a name for what that feeling was yet. But it was not nothing. The Federal Surveyor Station came into view just as the light was failing. It was a solid structure built for function rather than comfort. Thick walls, small windows, a stone chimney that had seen decades of hard winters. Wyatt knew it from the years when the territorial government had been actively mapping the high country and surveyors had moved through the region like a slow tide, measuring and recording everything they touched. Most of them were gone now. The station had been maintained as a waypoint, a relay point, a place where federal business could be conducted at a distance from the politics of any particular town. Right now it looked like the most welcome building Wyatt had seen in 2 days. He scanned the perimeter before they approached. Old habit. The kind of habit you build when you've learned that the moments you stop checking are the moments things go wrong. He saw nothing that alarmed him, no extra horses, no lantern light in the windows that would suggest occupation, no tracks in the soft ground that didn't belong to the small and regular traffic of the station's normal operation. Clear, he said quietly. Clara exhaled, just barely, but he heard it. They rode in. The station keeper was a man named Pratt, stocky 50s, with a gray beard he kept neatly trimmed, and the deliberate, unhurried manner of someone who had spent 20 years as a government employee and had made his peace with what that meant and what it didn't. He recognized Wyatt from a previous encounter 3 years back and extended a weathered hand. "Callahan," he said. "Don't usually see you down this far." "Don't usually have reason," Wyatt said. "We need to hold here, expecting a federal inspector within 48 hours. Inspector Aldridge, Land Division, Denver." Pratt looked at Clara. He looked at the bandage on her arm, and the state of her dress, and the quality of alertness in her eyes, the particular alertness of someone who has not slept properly in a significant number of days. He did not ask unnecessary questions. "I've got 2 rooms in the back, stoves lit, there's food." "That's all we need," Clara said. Pratt showed them inside and asked nothing further, which elevated him considerably in Wyatt's estimation. They ate at the station's small table, actual cooked food, a bean and salt pork stew that Pratt kept on the back burner for exactly this kind of occasion. Clara ate the entire bowl and then sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of someone taking a quiet inventory of their body's current state and finding it less dire than previously catalogued. "You should sleep," Wyatt said. "So should you." "I'll take first watch." She looked at him. "Wyatt, you haven't slept since before I found you." "I slept an hour at the line shack." "You sat upright in a chair for an hour. That's not sleep." He did not have a good answer for this because it was accurate. She watched him not have the answer, and then she said, 4 hours. Take 4 hours. Pratt can watch. I can watch. You cannot be useful to anyone operating at this level of, I'm fine. You're 41 years old, and you rode all of yesterday and all of today and climbed a ridge that nearly killed both of us, and I need you functional tomorrow, not heroic and half-conscious. She said all of this with the firm, direct precision of someone who has made a decision on someone else's behalf and expects it to be implemented. 4 hours, that's an order. He looked at her. She looked back without flinching. And something about the absolute matter-of-factness of being given an order by this woman in this voice, with this particular expression, did something unexpected to the general architecture of Wyatt's resistance. "You sound like a foreman," he said. "Good," she said. "Go to sleep." He slept 5 hours. He would not have admitted this to anyone, but it was 5 hours, and when he came back to himself, it was deep night, and Clara was sitting at the table with Pratt's oil lamp turned low and her father's letter open in front of her, and a small notebook she had produced from somewhere in which she was making notes in a precise, slanted hand. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway and registered the additional hour without comment. "Anything?" he asked. "Quiet," she said. "Come look at this." He sat across from her. She had laid out the letter beside her notebook and had been working through it systematically, extracting names, dates, property descriptions, cross-referencing against what she knew from memory about the county record system and the territorial land office procedures. She had organized it into a sequence of events, a timeline that began 4 years ago when Harrington first appeared in the territory, and moved forward in careful documented steps toward the present. Watching her work was something. He had known she was intelligent. You couldn't miss it, the way she spoke, the way she thought, the way she had built and composed that telegraph message in her head over the course of a mountain crossing. But this was different. This was precision. The kind of methodical, rigorous ordering of information that requires not just intelligence, but a trained discipline, the ability to sit with a mass of complicated, emotionally charged material and render it into something a stranger with authority could pick up and follow and act on. "You've done this before," he said. The same thing she had said to him about the bandaging. A different skill, the same recognition. She looked up. "My father kept the ledgers for 2 other homesteading families in the basin when they couldn't manage it themselves. I helped him from the time I was 12. She looked back at the notebook. Numbers and records. "I've always been comfortable with them. They don't lie unless someone makes them lie, and when someone has made them lie, there's always a trace." She turned the notebook toward him and pointed at a column of dates. "Look at this. The 3 forged signatures on Harrington's false deeds, they're all dated within a 10-day window. November 1880. But the county clerk records show that Morrison, the compromised clerk, was in Denver during that exact period for a land registrar's conference. He couldn't have processed those documents in Ridgecrest, which means whoever stamped them and filed them was using a forged stamp or a secondary clerk acting outside proper procedure. And either way, every document filed in that 10-day window is invalid." Wyatt looked at the dates. "You'd need the Denver conference records to prove Morrison was absent. My father's letter references a letter Morrison himself wrote to my father in November 1880, excusing himself from a land survey appointment because he was in Denver." She touched a line in the letter. "That letter is with the solicitor in Denver." "That's significant. That's everything," she said. "It breaks the chain of custody on the documents Harrington is using to claim the land. Without that chain, he has nothing that will hold in a federal proceeding." She looked up at him. Her eyes in the low lamplight were sharp and tired, and burning with a certainty that had nothing to do with bravado. "We have him, Wyatt. If Aldridge has what my father sent him, and we have what I have here, and the solicitor has that letter, we have him completely." Wyatt held her gaze. He thought about Victor Harrington sitting somewhere comfortable right now, insulated by layers of money and distance, operating with the deep certainty of a man who has always found that certainty warranted. He thought about the Tanner family and their burned house. He thought about the Garfield family, who had nearly lost their land to a similar pattern of quiet, systematic pressure, and had only kept it because a lawyer in Denver owed Wyatt Callahan a favor from a river. He thought about the new fence posts in the Elk Creek Basin and the black-painted sign on raw wood that had not even waited for Thomas Bennett to be properly mourned before announcing its intentions. "He's not going to like losing," Wyatt said. "No," Clara agreed. "He won't. He'll come at it hard when he understands what's happening. Men like Harrington, they don't accept defeat quietly. They escalate." She looked at him steadily. "I know. That means we need to hold this position without anyone outside knowing we're here until Aldridge arrives. Once the inspector is physically present with a federal mandate, Harrington's legal options narrow dramatically. But between now and then—" "I know," she said again, not dismissively, with the weight of someone who has already thought this through and arrived at the same conclusions. "I know what the next 48 hours look like. I'm not asking for certainty. I'm asking for enough time." Something moved in Wyatt's chest, a shifting of something that had been held in a fixed position for a long time, disturbed by the simple fact of a woman sitting across from him in the middle of the night, who understood exactly what she was asking for, and exactly what it might cost, and was asking for it anyway, with both eyes open. "All right," he said, "then that's what we do." He took the second watch while Clara finally slept, and Pratt dozed in his chair by the door. The night passed without incident. The mountains were still and cold, and completely indifferent to the human drama taking place within them, which Wyatt had always found paradoxically comforting. Dawn came gray and quiet. Wyatt made coffee on Pratt's stove and was handing a cup to Clara when she had appeared silently in the kitchen doorway when they both herded horses. More than one. coming from the south, from the direction of the main road. They looked at each other. Not the relaxed sound of travelers, not the loose wandering rhythm of casual movement, a deliberate pace. Controlled, the pace of people who know where they are going and are going there with purpose. Wyatt set down his coffee cup without a sound. He took his rifle from the wall mount by the door, already positioned there by habit from the night before, and went to the window. 4 riders. Approaching on the south trail from the direction of Ridgecrest. Coming in slow and visible, which was either confidence or a message. Probably both. "Pratt," Wyatt said. "I see them," the station keeper said from behind him already at the second window. "You know any of them?" "2." Pratt's voice was even. "Near side big one in the brown coat. That's Dale Cutter. He works for Harrington directly, runs his enforcement." A pause. "Left of him is a man called Reeves, lawyer, Ridgecrest. He's been Harrington's legal representative in every property filing for the past 3 years." A lawyer. Not just enforcers. Harrington had sent a lawyer. Which meant this was not a raid. This was something more careful than a raid. Something that wanted to look legitimate. "They know we're here," Clara said from behind him. Her voice was completely level. He turned. She was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the main room, dressed her coat on her father's letter, already returned to its place against her chest. She had been awake and ready before the riders appeared. Some part of her, he understood, had never fully stopped watching. "Morrison told them," she said. "Or someone at the telegraph station, not Burrell." Wyatt was certain enough of that. But the past settlement had other ears, and Harrington paid well for information. Doesn't matter how, they're here. The riders stopped 20 yards from the station door. The lawyer Reeves called out in the practiced carrying voice of a man accustomed to making formal pronouncements in outdoor settings. "Station Keeper Pratt, we're here on behalf of Harrington Land Holdings Incorporated, with a civil order from Judge Alderman of the Ridgecrest County Court. We require admittance to conduct a lawful search and to serve notice on a Miss Clara Bennett believed to be present on these premises." Clara's jaw tightened. "Judge Alderman," she said quietly. "My father mentioned him. He's been ruling in Harrington's favor on land disputes for 2 years." "Bought," Wyatt said. "Or afraid," she said. "Either way, his orders carry county authority." "Not federal authority," Wyatt said. She looked at him. He looked back. And the same thought arrived in both of them simultaneously because they had been thinking in parallel for long enough now that the convergence happened without words. 48 hours. Aldridge. Federal jurisdiction supersedes county jurisdiction in territorial land disputes under the Act of 1875. If they could hold this position legally formally, without giving Harrington the physical confrontation he could use to muddy the waters, then whatever a county judge had signed was going to matter very much less than what a federal inspector was bringing from Denver. Wyatt went to the door. He opened it, but did not step outside. He stood in the doorframe with his rifle in his hand, the butt resting on the sill, the barrel pointed at the sky, a visible reminder without a direct threat. The grammar of these situations had its own vocabulary, and he was fluent in it. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "this is a federal surveying station. It operates under territorial jurisdiction, not county authority. A civil order from Judge Alderman of the Ridgecrest County Court does not give you right of entry or search on federal premises. I expect you know that." Reeves was a thin man with a precise gray suit that had no business being in the Colorado high country, and appeared to be aware of this without being apologetic about it. He looked at Wyatt with the careful measuring expression of a man who has walked into a legal situation he expected to be simpler than it is turning out to be. "The woman on those premises is the subject of a civil matter that supersedes." "It doesn't supersede federal jurisdiction," Wyatt said. "And I'd be careful about your next sentence, Mr. Reeves, because whatever you say on federal property in front of a federal station keeper is going into a report that will reach Denver." Pratt, to his considerable credit, stepped into the doorway beside Wyatt with the unhurried calm of a man who has been a federal employee for 20 years and knows exactly what that means and what it protects him to do. He's right, Pratt said, in the same mild bureaucratic tone he used for everything. I'll be filing a report on this interaction regardless. You're welcome to state your business formally for the record. Reeves looked at Cutter. Cutter, large patient with the cold stillness of someone accustomed to waiting for the moment when the legal conversation ended and the other kind began, had not taken his eyes off Wyatt since the door opened. We're not going anywhere, Cutter said. He said it quietly without inflection. We'll wait. You're welcome to wait on the public road, Pratt said, not on station grounds. A silence. The particular kind of silence in which multiple people are calculating rapidly. Then Reeves gathered his reins. We'll be back, he said. It had a different tone than when the men had said it at Wyatt's cabin 2 nights ago. More formal, more patient, more certain. They rode back to the edge of the South Trail and stopped there, waiting. Wyatt closed the door. Inside, Clara was standing in the middle of the room. She had heard everything. Her face was doing the controlled level thing, but there were spots of color high in her cheeks that had not been there before, the particular color of someone running on adrenaline and the conscious suppression of an emotion they are not ready to allow yet. They're going to sit out there, she said. Yes. And if Aldridge doesn't arrive in 48 hours, he'll arrive. Wyatt? Her voice was sharp, not angry at him, angry at the situation and placing it somewhere precise. What if he doesn't? Wyatt looked at her. Then we go to the alternative. What's the alternative? The solicitor in Denver. You said 30 days before he opens the copies your father sent him. How many days ago did your father send them? Clara counted. 23. 7 days until he opens them automatically. If Aldridge is delayed, 7 days is too long, she said. We can't hold this position for 7 days. No, he agreed. But we can get a telegraph to the solicitor asking him to open them early. Aldridge's message confirms federal investigation. That gives the solicitor legal grounds to break the 30-day hold. She stared at him. That could work. It's a fallback. We don't need it yet. No, she said, and she exhaled, and the color in her cheeks shifted from the adrenaline red to something more complex. No, we don't need it yet. She pressed both hands flat on the table. I'm sorry, I don't... She stopped, started again. I don't usually panic. You didn't panic, he said. You planned. There's a difference. She looked at him. The quality of her looking at him had changed over the past 2 days, in a way that he had been aware of without examining closely. It had moved from the measuring cataloging assessment of the first night to something more direct. Less like reading a stranger, and more like looking at someone she had arrived at a position on and was no longer questioning. He was aware of it the way you're aware of a change in air pressure, not always conscious, but present, operating somewhere underneath the more immediate concerns. Tell me something, she said. Depends on what? Why did you really leave before? You said you abandoned society, that you'd lost everything, but you don't... She looked for the words. You don't seem like a man who quits easily, so why? The question sat in the air. He looked at it with the expression of a man deciding whether to pick it up or step over it. I had a ranch, he said finally. South of here, not large, but good land, and I'd built it from nothing over 8 years. There was a woman. He said it without particular weight, straightforwardly. Her name was Ellen. She and I, it was serious. We were building something together. He looked at his hands. There was a drought, 3 years of it, then a fire that took the upper pastures, then a bank that had extended credit on the expectation of a recovery that didn't come fast enough. He turned his cup in his hands. Ellen had family in Missouri, good family, stable. When it was clear the ranch wasn't going to survive, she went back to them. I don't blame her. She had good reasons. He paused. But I came up here, and I built a small thing, and I decided not to build anything large again. Clara was quiet for the long moment. Because if it's small enough, losing it doesn't break you. He looked at her. I understand that, she said. Not with pity, with the recognition of someone who has applied similar logic in their own life for different but related reasons. After my mother died, I was 9, I stopped. I learned not to hold things too tightly. My father was always saying I kept people at a distance. He said it like it was something to fix. She smiled slightly, a brief, complicated expression. He was not wrong. He sounds like he paid attention, Wyatt said. He paid attention to everything, she said. And this time, the past tense did not just carry weight. It arrived like something physical. She absorbed it quietly the way she absorbed everything hard, directly without deflecting. He would have liked you. He always respected a man who knew when to be quiet. Wyatt did not say anything. He thought that was probably the right response. It was late afternoon when Pratt appeared from the back room, where he had been making a meticulous record of the morning's events for his federal report, and said, "Rider coming from the north." One rider, moving fast. On the north trail, which was not the road anyone coming from Ridgecrest would have taken, which meant it was not Harrington's men. Wyatt was at the window. Clara was beside him close enough that he was aware of the warmth of her arm near his, the faint sound of her breathing. The rider came out of the tree line at a canter and pulled up hard in front of the station with the look of a man who had been pushing his horse for hours. He was in his 40s, lean with a heavy coat and a federal marshal's badge on the chest that caught the afternoon light. But he was alone. That was wrong. "He should have more men with him," Clara said. Her voice had gone careful. "Yes," Wyatt said. He was already reaching for the rifle. The man at the door identified himself as Deputy Inspector Samuels before Pratt had fully opened it. "I'm ahead of the main party," he said, stepping inside with the brisk efficiency of someone in a hurry. "Inspector Aldridge is 8 hours behind me. I was sent ahead to—" He stopped. He had seen Clara. He looked at her with the recognition of someone matching a person to a description. "Miss Bennett?" "Yes," she said. "What's happened?" "Nothing to the investigation," he said quickly, reading her face accurately. "Aldridge is fine. He's coming." He paused. "But we got intelligence out of Denver last night that I need to share with you before he arrives, because it changes the situation." He looked at Wyatt. "And you are Wyatt Callahan. I've been—" He considered the right word. "Accompanying Miss Bennett." Samuels accepted this and looked back at Clara. "Victor Harrington was in Denver 2 days ago. Met with the Territorial Governor's office. We believe he is attempting to secure a territorial injunction that would temporarily freeze all federal land proceedings in this county, pending a state-level review." Clara went very still. "If that injunction is granted," Samuels continued, "it doesn't stop the federal investigation permanently, but it creates a procedural delay of potentially 6 to 9 months, during which Harrington's claim on the property remains legally active, and you have no mechanism to challenge it through federal channels." "Can he get that injunction?" Wyatt asked. "He has money and he has relationships," Samuel said. "Whether those are enough, we don't know. The governor's office has not confirmed or denied." Clara sat down at the table, not because she needed to, because she was thinking, and thinking at this level required stillness. Wyatt watched her face moving through the information with the same systematic precision he had watched her apply to the ledger pages the night before, rapidly, methodically, without panic. "The 30-day hold," she said. "The solicitor in Denver." Samuels looked at her. "What about it?" "My father's copies of the documents are with a solicitor in Denver under a 30-day sealed instruction. If someone can reach that solicitor today, not in 7 days today, and present him with Inspector Aldridge's federal investigation order as cause to break the hold, those documents enter federal hands immediately." She looked up at Samuels. "A territorial injunction can freeze federal proceedings. It cannot retroactively remove documents already in federal possession. If Aldridge has those copies before the injunction is filed, Harrington's legal maneuver is considerably less powerful." Samuel stared at her. "You're saying we need to get to the solicitor before Harrington gets to the governor?" "I'm saying whoever moves first wins this," she said. "And we need to move first." She looked at Wyatt. He looked back at her. Outside on the South Road, 4 men were still waiting with a county court order and the patience of people on a salary. 8 hours behind a federal deputy, an inspector was riding hard from Denver. And in the middle of all of it, in a federal station on the side of a Colorado mountain, a woman who had been running for 9 days had just pivoted from defense to offense with the precision of someone who had been building to this moment through every exhausted, hunted, painful hour of the journey. "The solicitor," Wyatt said. "What's his name? His address in Denver?" "Harlan Gage," Clara said. "Office on Market Street. My father mentioned it in the letter." Wyatt looked at Samuels. "Can you telegraph Denver from the pass station?" "The line was intact when I came through," Samuels said. "Then someone needs to ride to that telegraph station in the next hour and send that message before Harrington's people connect what we're doing with what they're trying to do." He was already picking up his coat. He looked at Clara. "Write the message." She was already reaching for the notebook. "Wyatt." Her hand caught his sleeve as he moved toward the door. He stopped. She was looking up at him with an expression that was not fear. She had moved beyond fear, he thought, in the course of the last 2 days, but something more vulnerable than the determined competence she'd been running on. Something that came from the exhausted, honest place underneath strategy. "Be careful." He looked at her hand on his sleeve. He looked at her face. He did not say anything for a moment, and in that moment something passed between them that was not words and did not need to be. "Always," he said. She let go. He went out the door into the late afternoon cold and was in the saddle before Cutter and Reeves at the South Road had fully processed what they were seeing. He did not ride toward them. He rode north hard at a full gallop back toward the pass, and behind him he heard the sudden shout as Cutter understood what was happening and wheeled his horse and started after him. And Wyatt Callahan, who had spent 12 years avoiding exactly this kind of thing, leaned over Rio's neck and rode like everything depended on it, because this time it did. Rio ran like he understood what was at stake. Wyatt did not look back. Looking back was a luxury for people who had time for it, and he did not. He heard Cutter behind him, one horse hard and fast, gaining slightly on the downhill stretch before the north trail climbed again, and he made the calculations that men make when they are being pursued on horseback in terrain they know well. Distance to the pass station. Time. The angle of the trail. The places where a man who knew the mountain had an advantage over a man who was simply following. He knew a cut. Half a mile up where the trail bent east around a granite outcrop, there was a direct line through the timber that shaved 10 minutes off the route if your horse trusted you enough to take it blind. Rio trusted him. That was 12 years of trust, built in the specific currency of never asking the horse to do something genuinely stupid. He took the cut. The timber was dense and the footing uncertain, and the branches came low enough that he pressed himself flat against Rio's neck and let the horse read the ground. Behind him, the sound of Cutter's pursuit went to the right following the trail as it bent east, and then the timber swallowed the sound, and Wyatt was alone in the trees with nothing but the horse's breathing and the muffled percussion of hooves on pine needle ground. He came out above the pass station. He came out ahead. He did not slow down until he was through the station door. Burl looked up from his chair with the resigned expression of a man who has already had more drama through his station than any single week warranted. He took one look at Wyatt's face and stood up without being asked. "I need Denver," Wyatt said. "Market Street. A solicitor named Harlan Gage." "Telegraph address?" "I don't have it. Do you have a Denver directory?" Burl reached under the counter and produced a battered book with the patient efficiency of someone who kept things where they could be found. He ran his finger down the page. "Gage and Associates. Legal. I've got an office telegraph code." He looked up. "Message." Wyatt pulled Clara's notebook page from his coat. She had written it in the clean, precise hand she used for everything that mattered. He read it verbatim, and Burl transcribed without comment, his key moving in the practiced rhythm of long experience. Outside hoofbeats. Wyatt put his hand on the rifle. Cutter came through the door 40 seconds after the message went out. He was breathing hard. His face was the color of a man who has been riding at a full run for 20 minutes and is not entirely pleased about it. He looked at Wyatt. He looked at Burl. He looked at the telegraph key with the particular expression of a man doing the arithmetic of a situation and not liking what it adds up to. "What did you send?" he said. "Federal business," Wyatt said. "None of yours." Cutter took 2 steps into the room. He was a big man, and he used the fact of his size the way some men use a raised voice as a first argument, a demonstration of what might follow. "I work for Victor Harrington," he said, "and Mr. Harrington has a county court order that—" "A county court order," Wyatt said, "that does not reach into federal telegraph communications. You want to dispute that, write a letter to the Territorial Attorney General." He held Cutter's gaze steadily with the flat patience of a man who is not bluffing and knows the other man knows it. "The message has been sent. There is nothing you can accomplish here except getting yourself into a report that a federal inspector is going to read in approximately 8 hours. Cutter's jaw was tight. The calculation was visible on his face. What he wanted to do against what the consequences of doing it would be weighed against the fact that Reeves the lawyer was back at the surveyor station and was not here to authorize the next step. Men like Cutter, in Wyatt's experience, did not move without authorization on anything that required them to cross a clear legal line. The violence was always there in reserve, but it needed permission. "You're making a serious mistake," Cutter said. "Both of you." "Noted," Wyatt said. Cutter held the room for another moment. Then he turned and went back through the door with the controlled, unhurried exit of a man who is choosing to leave, rather than being made to, which is a distinction that mattered to him. Burl let out a breath. "Well," he said. "Did the message go?" Wyatt said. "Went clean," Burl said. "Acknowledgement on the other end." He looked at the receipt tape. "Someone at that Denver office received it." He paused. "Whether they act on it tonight is another matter." "It's enough," Wyatt said, and he meant it in the way that you mean something when you have done everything you can do and have handed the rest to the machinery of events. "It's enough for tonight." He rode back to the surveyor station in the last of the daylight with Cutter trailing him at a deliberate and visible distance, not catching up, not falling back, simply maintaining presence, the way a shadow maintains presence. A reminder. Wyatt had dealt with reminders before. When he came through the station door, Clara was on her feet before he finished crossing the threshold. She read his face before he spoke, and the tension in her shoulders shifted, not gone, but reorganized from the acute kind into the sustained kind, which is its own form of relief. "It went," she said. "Clean acknowledgement on the other end," he said. He was repeating Burl's words, and she heard the echo of someone else's phrasing in it and understood. "Cutter. He's outside. He'll report to Reeves, and they'll sit on the road until morning." Wyatt hung his coat. "We have tonight." Inspector Cole Aldridge arrived not 8 hours later but 6, which suggested he had pushed his party harder than Samuels had estimated. He came with 3 deputies and a territorial marshal and a leather case that he carried himself, and did not set down on anything, which told Wyatt everything about what was inside it. He was a compact man in his early 50s, with a precise gray mustache, and the particular brand of controlled authority that belongs to people who have spent careers operating in situations where the rules are both crucial and routinely ignored. He shook Clara's hand with both of his and held it a moment and said, "Your father wrote to me for 14 months, Miss Bennett. I am sorry I could not move faster." Clara received this with the quiet grace of someone who has thought carefully about what they will do when they finally hear this sentence said out loud. "You're here," she said. "That's what matters." They sat at Pratt's table for 2 hours. Aldridge, his senior deputy, Clara, and Wyatt, who had not been asked to stay, but who had not been asked to leave either, and who found himself occupying the unusual position of someone who had crossed into another person's crisis so completely that the line between witness and participant had long since ceased to be visible. Clara laid out the evidence. She did it with the same systematic precision Wyatt had watched her apply at 2 a.m. over her father's letter. The timeline, the dates, the Morrison absence, the forged signatures 10-day window, her father's copies, the solicitor in Denver, the Tanner family in New Mexico. She presented it linearly and completely, and without embellishment, letting the facts carry the weight she had been carrying on her body for 9 days. Aldridge asked questions, precise professional questions that revealed a man who had already done significant groundwork, who had his own timeline, his own evidence, his own corroborating documentation, and was now meshing Clara's material with his to see where the seams were and where they held. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The Morrison absence alone is enough to invalidate the core documents. Combined with your father's copies, if the solicitor in Denver acts on your telegraph tonight, we have a complete federal case before Harrington's injunction request can be processed." He looked at her. "You did this, Miss Bennett. What you've built here under these circumstances?" He stopped. A man accustomed to precision finding that precision insufficient. "Your father would be proud." Clara looked at the table for a moment. Just a moment. Then she looked up and said, "What happens next?" "First light," Aldridge said. "We ride to Ridgecrest. Formal visible with federal authority displayed. I want Harrington's men to see the marshal's badge before we reach the courthouse. He needs to understand what is happening before he can construct a response to it." He looked at Wyatt. "And you, Mr. Callahan. Deputy Samuels tells me you've been rather essential to getting us to this table." "I know the mountains," Wyatt said. "He did more than that," Clara said. She said it simply without elaborate credit. The kind of statement that carries more weight for not being decorated. Aldridge looked between them. He was a man who read people for a living, and what he read in that exchange he kept to himself. But something in his expression settled into a particular kind of approval that was more personal than professional. "Get some rest," he said. "We move at first light." That night the station was quiet, in a way it had not been since they arrived, a different quality of quiet from the watchful armed quiet of the previous nights. The federal presence outside had done what federal presence does in situations like this. It had changed the mathematics. Cutter and Reeves and their 2 companions had moved back further on the South Road when the marshal's party arrived, and they had stayed back. Wyatt sat by the station's front window in the dark with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He was not watching for danger. For the first time in 3 days, watching for danger was no longer solely his responsibility, and the absence of that weight was strange, in the way that any weight you've carried long enough becomes strange when someone lifts it. Clara came out of this back room at some point past midnight. She moved quietly, and she did not seem surprised to find him at the window. She sat in the chair across from him and pulled her coat around her shoulders, and they sat in the dark without speaking for a while. "Can't sleep," he said eventually. "I slept some." She looked at the window, at the dark outside it. "I keep thinking about tomorrow." "It'll go the way it needs to go. Aldridge knows what he's doing." "I know." She paused. "I'm not worried about Aldridge." Another pause shorter. "I'm thinking about after." He looked at her. "After tomorrow," she said. "If it goes the way it should, the land comes back, the injunction fails, Harrington faces federal charges." She said each piece of this as though testing the reality of it, as though it had been so long since the future was something she was allowed to think about that the thinking of it required careful handling. "I have to go back to the house, to the Basin property, and I have to—" She stopped. "I have to figure out what starting over looks like, after all of this." "You've already started over," he said. "You started when you picked up your father's letter and ran." She considered this. That wasn't starting over. That was survival. "What's the difference?" She looked at him. In the dark her face was soft in a way it was not in daylight, the precision still there, but the hard edge of sustained vigilance relaxed enough to show what was underneath. Survival is keeping yourself alive because stopping isn't an option. Starting over is choosing something, deciding what you actually want. She looked at the window again. "I haven't had the luxury of deciding what I want in a very long time." Wyatt was quiet. He thought about 12 years on a mountain. About the small cabin and the small life and the deliberate, careful smallness of everything he had built since Ellen and the ranch and the drought. about how a person can convince themselves that smallness is wisdom, when sometimes it is just fear wearing the hat of wisdom. "What did you want?" he asked. Before all of this, she thought about it seriously the way she thought about everything. "I wanted to do what I was doing for my father for other people. The ledgers, the records, the documentation. I'm good at it, and I know I'm good at it, and there's real work to be done with it. In this territory, there are families losing things they built because they don't know how to document their claim properly. They don't know how to organize their records. They don't know what Morrison's absence from the courthouse in November 1880 means for their case." Her voice had found a direction. "I want to help them know." He looked at her. "That's not small," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not." She looked at him directly. "What about you? What about me? What do you want after? What?" The question landed in a different place than she probably intended it to land, because the word after in her mouth was freighted with the assumption that there was an after, that they were both in, that the story did not end when the federal case was filed and the land was returned, that there was a continued shape to things that extended beyond the immediate crisis. He noticed the assumption. He noticed that he did not want to correct it. "I don't know," he said, which was the truth, and also the most honest thing he had said in a long time about anything that mattered. "That's all right," she said. "You don't have to know yet." They sat in the dark for a while longer. At some point, Clara fell asleep in the chair, her coat pulled up to her chin, and Wyatt took his from the wall peg and laid it over her without waking her, and went back to the window and watched the dark mountain hold itself still and cold and vast until the first gray light began to separate the sky from the peaks. Ridgecrest at mid-morning was a town that knew something was happening before it knew what. Word moves fast in small western towns, and federal marshals on horseback move visibly. And by the time Aldridge's party came down the main street, with Clara Bennett riding beside the inspector and Wyatt a half-step behind her, on Rio people had emerged from storefronts and doorways with the particular alertness of a community that has been holding a collective breath around a particular name for long enough. Wyatt watched their faces. He had lived in this part of the territory for 12 years, and he knew enough of these people to read the range of what was on those faces: surprise, cautious hope, fear, calculation. Some people stepped back into their doorways. Others stepped forward. Victor Harrington was not in the courthouse. He was not, they discovered, in Ridgecrest at all. His man Reeves was there at the courthouse steps with a different document than the county order. This one bearing a territorial seal, and he presented it to Aldridge with the smooth, practiced confidence of a man who has been assured the paper in his hand is decisive. Aldridge read it. He read it twice. His face did not change. Then he handed it back to Reeves and said, "This injunction was filed yesterday afternoon in the territorial governor's office. Is that correct?" It was, Reeves said. "And are you aware?" Aldridge said in the same measured, bureaucratic tone that Pratt used, the tone of men who worked within systems, and knew those systems at a depth that made them deeply calm in moments that frightened everyone else. That at 7:43 yesterday evening, under the Federal Land and Property Act of 1875, the documents relevant to this investigation were formally received into federal custody through the Office of the Territorial Land Inspector, documented, time-stamped. He opened his leather case and produced a single page, making this injunction retroactively irrelevant to the evidence already in federal hands. Reeves looked at the page. The color of his face changed in a way that was visible from where Wyatt was standing. Harlan Gage, the solicitor in Denver. He had acted on the telegraph. He had moved last night. Clara made a sound beside Wyatt that was not quite a word. Something below a word. He looked at her. Her hands were gripped around her saddle horn, and her eyes were bright, and she was looking at Aldridge's document, the way you look at something you have been trying to reach for so long that seeing it in someone's hands makes you uncertain briefly whether you're actually awake. "The injunction," Reeves said. His voice had lost its professional smoothness. "The injunction is Insufficient, Aldridge said, as I expect Mr. Harrington's legal counsel in Denver will confirm when he reviews the timeline. He put the document back in the case and looked at Reeves with a patience that was perfectly genuine and therefore more devastating than any impatience would have been. Where is Mr. Harrington? Reeves hesitated. I'll ask once more, Aldridge said. Reeves pressed his lips together. He left for Denver yesterday morning, before or after the injunction was filed. A longer hesitation. After. Aldridge nodded. Then he already knows. He turned to his marshal. We'll begin the formal evidentiary review here. Get the county deed records, all of them the past 4 years. Nothing leaves this building without my authorization. He turned back to Reeves. You are welcome to observe, Mr. Reeves, or you are welcome to leave. What you are not welcome to do is obstruct. Reeves made the decision that men make when the wall they were leaning against has been removed without warning. He stepped to the side, and Inspector Cole Aldridge walked into the Ridgecrest Courthouse with Clara Bennett at his side and did what needed to be done. Wyatt stood in the street and watched them go through the door and felt the exhale of 3 days settle through him. Not triumphant, not dramatic, just the specific physical release of sustained tension being released at the point where it is no longer needed. He was still standing there when Clara came back out maybe 20 minutes later. She came down the courthouse steps with the particular quality of movement that belongs to someone who has just put down something very heavy that they have been carrying for a very long time. Not light. It would take more than 20 minutes to be light after 9 days and a dead father and a stolen inheritance. But different. The quality of the weight had changed. She walked directly to where he was standing by Rio's head. She stopped in front of him. She looked up at him with the direct, measuring, evaluating look that he had learned to read as her particular brand of complete honesty. It's going to take months, she said. Even with the evidence, even with the federal case, the legal process will be what it is. Yes, he said. Harrington has money, and he has lawyers, and he will fight this every step. Yes, and there's the Tanner family in New Mexico. And the 2 families who sold under pressure, they may have grounds for reclamation claims. And Morrison the clerk needs to face his own proceedings. And there are 3 other properties mentioned in my father's notes that need to be reviewed. She listed all of this with the same systematic precision she brought to everything. But underneath the precision was something else, the beginnings of a shape, a direction, a future organizing itself out of the rubble of the past 3 weeks. There is a very large amount of work to be done. Yes, he said again. I can't do it alone. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to fight anymore, she said. The precision in her voice had softened at the edges just slightly, just enough. I'm asking if you wanted to, if you could see a way toward... She stopped. In all the days he had spent with her, he had not once seen her lose the thread of a sentence. It was a remarkable thing to witness. I'm asking if you want to stay. The word stay hung in the air between them. Wyatt thought about his cabin on the North Ridge. His small, deliberate, carefully limited life. The 11 days between conversations. The counting of them. He thought about a woman who had grabbed his hand in a dark cabin on a dirt floor and said, "Please don't leave me." He thought about what those words had meant to him in the moment he heard them, the thing they had reached in him that he had not expected anything to reach again. He thought about Ellen and the ranch and the drought and what it had cost him and what he had decided it meant about the wisdom of building things. He thought about how completely that decision had made sense for 12 years and how much less sense it had made over the past 3 days and how that shift had happened so quietly that he had not noticed it happening until he was already on the other side of it. Rio nosed his shoulder. The horse had opinions about standing in main streets and expressed them through minor physical commentary. Clara was watching him. She had asked the question, and she was letting it sit without pressure the way she let every important thing sit, giving it room to be answered honestly rather than quickly. I don't know what use I'd be, he said, to the legal work. You know the mountain routes, she said. You know the families in this territory. You know who has been wronged and who is afraid and who might be willing to talk if someone they trusted approached them. She paused. You also know how to stop a man from entering a building who has no right to enter it, and that is going to be necessary more than once in the months ahead. That's a practical argument, he said. I'm a practical woman, she said, and then with something in her voice that was not quite a smile, but was the interior of one, it is also not the only argument. He looked at her. She looked back. The main street of Ridgecrest moved around them with its ordinary noises, boots on boardwalks, horses, the distant hammer of the livery, and neither of them moved, and neither of them looked away. I'd need to bring Rio, he said. Obviously, she said, and I'm not good at being told what to do. Neither am I, she said. We'll argue about it. Something loosened in him. Something that had been held in a specific, deliberate, protective tension for 12 years, and had been loosening incrementally since a broken door knocked in a dark cabin, and a woman said, "Please don't leave me." And he had made the decision without entirely knowing he was making it to stay. The North Ridge cabin needs closing up properly before winter, he said. That'll take a week. All right, she said. Her voice was steady, but he heard everything it was steady over. After that, he looked at the courthouse door, where Aldridge and his deputies were doing the necessary work of dismantling 12 years of Harrington's architecture, one documented lie at a time. He looked back at Clara. After that, I reckon there's work to be done. She let out a breath. Small, private. The kind of thing you release when you have been holding it without knowing it. Yes, she said. There is. They stood in the street in the late morning light, and neither of them reached for the other, and neither of them needed to, because the things that were true between them did not require that yet, and both of them knew it. What was there was quieter than that and more solid, and it was built the way everything that endures is built, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of moments, in the shared weight of a hard crossing, in the trust that comes from watching someone be exactly who they are in circumstances that make pretending impossible. Wyatt Callahan, who had spent 12 years building a life small enough that losing it wouldn't break him, was standing in the main street of a town he had avoided for a decade. Looking at a woman who had been a stranger 6 days ago, and feeling the particular sensation of a man who has walked through a door he cannot walk back through. He found to his own considerable surprise that he did not want to walk back through it. From the courthouse behind them, Aldridge's voice could be heard in the methodical, authoritative cadence of a federal proceeding, getting properly underway. The work was beginning. The long, slow, document-by-document work of restoration, of giving back to people what had been taken from them through patience and cruelty, and the assumption that money was enough of an argument. It was going to take months. But the sun was up and the day was clear, and Victor Harrington was in Denver with a lawyer, reading a timeline that wasn't going to save him. And Clara Bennett was standing in front of the courthouse that was going to give her father's land back to her, with the particular bearing of a woman who has decided what she is and what she is for. And Wyatt Callahan was staying. That was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The week it took Wyatt to close up the North Ridge cabin turned out to be 8 days. He did not rush it. He had built that place board by board over the first winter after he came up the mountain, and he owed it the courtesy of a proper closing, not abandonment, not the hasty departure of a man fleeing something, but the deliberate putting to rest of a chapter that had served its purpose and was now complete. He banked the stove. He shuttered the windows. He wrapped the tools he was leaving in oilcloth and stored them on the high shelf where moisture wouldn't reach them. He walked the perimeter fence one last time and repaired 2 sections that had been troubling him since spring. On the last morning, he stood in the doorway for a while and looked at the interior of the life he had built for 12 years and felt the full weight of what it had been. The loneliness, yes, but also the silence that had sometimes been genuinely peaceful, the mornings that had been purely beautiful, the particular hard-won competence of a man who had learned to rely entirely on himself. He did not want to pretend that none of that had value. It had value. It had kept him intact through a period when intact was all he could manage. But he was done with it now. He understood the difference between a refuge and a cage, and he understood that the line between them is not always visible from the inside. He pulled the door shut. He did not look back. He brought Rio down the mountain on the 9th morning and rode directly to the Bennett property in the Elk Creek Basin. He did not stop in Ridgecrest. He did not need to. Everything that was happening in Ridgecrest was happening without him, and proceeding the way that Aldridge had said it would proceed, methodically, federally, with the unstoppable patience of due process properly applied. The first thing he did when he reached the basin was pull up the fence posts. Not all of them, just the ones on the near side of the property, the ones that had borne the painted sign. He pulled them with his own hands one by one, working the posts out of the ground with a pry bar and a cold and deliberate satisfaction that he did not examine too carefully, because it was not a complicated feeling and did not require analysis. Clara came out of the house when she heard the work. She stood on the porch and watched him for a moment. Then she said, "I was going to do that. I got here first," he said. She looked at him. Something in her face moved, a small private thing that she did not try to hide and did not try to display. She went back inside and came out 10 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee and sat on the porch steps and handed him one when he finished the last post. He sat beside her on the steps. They drank their coffee. The basin spread out before them in the early light. Her father's land returned, not yet in law, but in fact the paperwork grinding forward in Aldridge's capable hands, while the land itself simply existed as it had always existed, indifferent to the human arguments conducted over it. "How's the house?" Wyatt asked. "They went through it," she said. "Harrington's people after I left. They weren't careful." A pause. "I've been cleaning for 4 days. There are things broken that can't be fixed. There are things missing." She looked at her coffee. "My father's desk. They took it apart looking for hidden compartments. It was his grandfather's desk." She said it flatly, but he heard what it cost. "I'll have it repaired." "What needs doing on the property?" he said. She looked at him with the slight, careful assessment of someone who is not used to being offered help without a price. 9 days of running had apparently not entirely cured that. He understood. Some things take longer than 9 days. The fence on the east pasture needs replacing. Not the new posts, the old fence, the boundary fence my father built. They cut through it in 4 places. She looked at the basin. The water control gate at the upper spring needs inspection. They were trying to determine how to divert the flow before everything stopped. Her jaw tightened briefly. "I want to know exactly what they did to it before I trust it. I can look at the gate today," he said. "Fence can wait until we have lumber." She looked at him. "You're not asking what you're getting paid." "No," he agreed. "Wyatt." "Clara." He said it with the same calm finality she used when she had made a decision and considered the matter resolved. "I know how to fix a water gate, and I know how to hang a fence. Those are useful things right now. We can discuss the other arrangements when there's time to discuss them properly." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, the same deliberate, serious nod she had given him in his cabin on the first night when they were negotiating whether to trust each other at all. Some gestures between people become their own language with repetition, and that particular nod had become that. "The gate's at the upper spring," she said. "Trail goes up behind the house." He found the gate in worse shape than he expected. Harrington's men had not been subtle in their inspection. They had loosened the control mechanism, tested the diversion valve, and left the whole assembly in a state that would have caused significant water loss within another week. He spent 3 hours on it, working with the tools from his saddlebag, and the specific focused attention he gave to broken things that mattered, and when he was done, it was sound and clean and running exactly as Thomas Bennett had built it to run. He stood beside the spring for a moment when he finished. The water came out of the ground cold and clear and steady, the water that a man had built his life around, and that had gotten him killed, and that would, in the months ahead, be returned to the people it rightfully served. Wyatt had spent enough time near water in the high country to understand what it meant in this territory. Water was not just water. Water was survival and power, and the difference between a piece of land that could sustain a family and a piece of land that couldn't. Thomas Bennett had understood that when he filed his claim in 1861. Harrington had understood it when he decided to steal it. The difference between them was what they did with the understanding. He came back down the trail in the late afternoon to find Clara at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of her, and a second visitor at the house, a woman Wyatt didn't immediately recognize, sitting across from Clara with her own set of documents and the tense, careful posture of someone who has been persuaded to be somewhere against her better judgment. Clara looked up when he appeared in the doorway. "Wyatt, this is Martha Doyle. Her family had the Lower Meadow property, sold it to Harrington's company 8 months ago." She looked at Martha. "I've been telling her what Inspector Aldridge found in the county records." Martha Doyle was a woman of about 50, lean and weathered, and with the specific kind of wariness that comes from having been both trusting and badly burned by the experience. She looked at Wyatt and then back at Clara. "Your man Aldridge," she said. "He can actually do something." "He already is doing something," Clara said. "The question is whether your family's sale falls within the category of coerced transfer. If Harrington's representatives made representations to you that were demonstrably false about water rights, about competing claims about the legal status of the property, that's grounds for reclamation." Martha's jaw worked. "They told us there was an existing lien on the property that would take precedence over our deed if we didn't sell. That we'd lose it either way, and at least selling gave us something." "Was there a lien?" Wyatt said from the doorway. Martha looked at him. "That's what we asked. They showed us a document." "Was the document dated?" Clara said. "November 1880, Martha said. And then she saw Clara's expression, and something shifted in her own. "What?" "Morrison was in Denver in November 1880, Clara said. She said it quietly, the way you say something that is going to change the shape of what someone understands about a terrible thing that happened to them. Any document stamped and filed in Ridgecrest during that period is procedurally invalid. The lien they showed you." She stopped. Let Martha complete the thought herself. Martha Doyle sat very still for a long moment. "They made it up," she said. Not a question. The voice of someone arriving at a truth they half knew and had been afraid to name. "They fabricated the document and presented it to you as a legal instrument to force a sale," Clara said. "Under federal land fraud statutes that makes your transfer legally voidable." She laid her hand briefly on Martha's forearm. "Your property may be recoverable." What happened on Martha Doyle's face in the next 30 seconds was something Wyatt would not have described to anyone because he did not have the words for it and did not think it was his to describe. It was the face of someone receiving back something they had given up. Not the thing itself, not yet, perhaps not for months, but the possibility of it. The legal, documented, federally supported possibility that the loss was not permanent. She put both hands flat on the table and breathed. "What do I need to do?" she said. Clara began to explain. Wyatt made coffee. That was the beginning of it. Martha Doyle was not the last. Over the weeks that followed, as Aldridge's investigation moved through the county records with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had been waiting 14 months for permission to do exactly this, people came to the Bennett property in ones and twos and threes. Families who had sold under pressure. A man whose brother had tried to fight the forged deed and had been run out of the territory. An elderly woman whose son had died in what the official record called an accident during a property dispute, and what her own memory called something considerably different. Clara met with all of them. She listened. She asked the same precise, careful questions. She made notes in her small, deliberate hand. She organized what she heard into the same systematic structure she had applied to her father's letter. Names, dates, documents, the specific chain of fraudulent events as each family had experienced it. Wyatt was not in most of those meetings. He understood his role, and it was not that one. His role was the fence that got repaired, and the roof section on the barn that had been left open to weather, and the water gate that he checked every 2 weeks without being asked. His role was the quiet presence on the property that sent a message to anyone watching that Clara Bennett was not alone and was not unprotected. His role was also on two separate occasions in the first month to be standing in the yard when men came to the property uninvited. The first time it was two men he didn't recognize presenting themselves as surveyors for a company he had never heard of that had a legitimacy that did not survive 3 direct questions. They left without incident, which he attributed to the specific persuasiveness of a man standing in a yard with a rifle on his shoulder and the expression of someone who has made certain decisions about how this particular interaction is going to conclude. The second time was different. The second time was a single rider who came up the Basin Trail in the early evening in early October, and who Wyatt watched from the porch long enough to identify before standing up. The rider's name was Cutter, and he came alone, which was either very confident or very stupid, and Wyatt had learned enough about Dale Cutter to know it was probably not stupid. He came up to the porch and stopped his horse and looked at Wyatt and then at the house behind him. "Miss Bennett inside." "Might be," Wyatt said. "I need to speak with her." "About—" Cutter looked at him with the patience of a man who has had a great deal of time to think and has arrived somewhere he did not expect to arrive. "About the investigation," he said. "About what I know." He held Wyatt's gaze. "About what I'm willing to say to Aldridge." Wyatt looked at him for a long moment. He read the man's face, not performing, not constructing, just tired in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something uncomfortable for long enough that setting it down has started to seem worth the cost. "Wait here," Wyatt said. He went inside. Clara was at the table. He told her what Cutter had said and watched her face process it. "Turning," she said. "Looks like." "Why now?" "Harrington's in Denver with lawyers who are billing him by the hour, and a federal case that's getting stronger every week," Wyatt said. "Men like Cutter read those situations. They figure out which side the odds have moved to." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Send him in." Cutter came inside and sat at the table where Martha Doyle and a dozen others had sat, and told what had been done to them, and he told the other half of it, the inside half, the operational half, the half that explained who had given which instructions, and when and in what form, and what had been done when people resisted, and what Harrington had said in private that he never said in documents. Clara took notes, every word, in the same precise hand she used for everything. When Cutter finished, she set down her pen and looked at him directly. "Why the Tanner fire?" she said. It was not a question. It was a door she was opening, and he could go through it or not. He went through it, slowly, with the specific difficulty of a man confessing to something he cannot undo and is not entirely sure he deserves to be forgiven for. He told her what he knew about the Tanner fire. He told her who had authorized it, and who had been present, and what had been said before and after. Clara listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "I need a written statement. Everything you just told me written and signed, before you speak to Aldridge." "If I do that—" "You're already here," she said. "You already said it. A written statement is protection, Mr. Cutter, not incrimination. It documents your cooperation at a specific point in time." She held his gaze. "Inspector Aldridge will treat cooperation differently than obstruction. That's not a promise I'm making, that's how federal proceedings work." Cutter looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at the woman across from him, who had been running from men like him 3 months ago, and was now sitting at her own table, organizing the case that was going to dismantle the world those men had built. "All right," he said. He wrote the statement at the kitchen table while Clara made coffee and Wyatt sat by the window and the evening settled in around the basin. Cutter wrote slowly with the painstaking effort of a man for whom the physical act of writing had never been easy, but he wrote everything, and when he was done, he signed it and handed it to Clara, and she looked at it and put it in the folder with everything else. "I'll contact Aldridge tonight," she said. Cutter stood up. He put on his hat. He looked at Wyatt. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not friendship, but the specific recognition between two men who have been in opposition and have now arrived at a mutual understanding of something larger than the opposition. "You rode hard to that telegraph station." Cutter said to Wyatt. I did, Wyatt said. I would have caught you if I'd known the mountain better. Yes, Wyatt agreed. You would have. Cutter nodded once. He went out. They heard his horse moving down the basin trail, and then the sound faded and the evening was quiet again. Clara looked at the folder on the table. Then she looked at Wyatt with an expression that was doing something he had never seen it do before. Not the precision, not the controlled determination, not the careful competence she wore like armor. Something underneath all of that. Something that had been waiting for a moment when the armor could come off even briefly. It's going to be enough, she said. Her voice was different, smaller. The voice of the woman who had grabbed his hand on a dirt floor and said, "Please don't leave me." All of this together. Aldridge said 2 weeks ago that if we got a cooperating witness from inside Harrington's operation, the federal case was complete. And now we have one. She pressed her hands flat on the folder. It's going to be enough. Yes, he said. It is. My father... She stopped, started again. He spent a year building something that he didn't live to see finished. Her voice held steady, but only just. And I have spent 3 months finishing it, and it's done, and he'll never... She stopped again. The armor had been holding a significant weight, and the weight was visible now in the way her shoulders had changed, in the way her face had changed. He'll never know it worked. Wyatt crossed the room. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat in it close the way you sit beside someone, when proximity itself is the thing that's needed, and he said quietly, "He knew it would work. He sent you the letter. He knew you." Clara looked at him. Her eyes were bright with something she was not going to let fall. She was too much her father's daughter to let it fall in the middle of a battle, and some part of her still understood this as the middle of a battle. But she leaned toward him slightly, just slightly, letting the distance between them decrease by a margin that was not dramatic and did not need to be. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it. The gate and the fence and the people who came to the door and..." She stopped. "For staying, when you could have gone back up the mountain months ago. I stayed because I wanted to," he said. It was the most direct thing he had said to her about any of this, and he said it without apology and without embellishment. She looked at him. He looked back. The kitchen was warm, and the evening was dark outside, and the Elk Creek Basin was quiet around them, and somewhere in Denver a federal case was being assembled piece by piece from everything they had built together, and everything her father had started building before them. "I know," she said, and the way she said it quietly and completely, and with the particular certainty of someone who has known a thing for some time, and is only now saying it out loud, told him that she had known it for a while, and had been waiting for him to say it, and was glad that he had. They sat at the table for a long time that evening. Not working, just sitting. Talking the way people talk when the immediate urgency has lifted enough to allow it, about her father and what he had been like, and about the ranch Wyatt had lost, and about Ellen and whether he had forgiven her, which he had, and about what forgiveness actually meant when you thought carefully about it, which Clara had thoughts on as she had thoughts on most things. They talked about the families who had come to the table, the Doyle family and the others, and what recovery was going to look like for each of them, and what it would take, and how long. They talked about the work ahead. They did not talk about themselves directly. They didn't need to. What they were was being built in the ordinary conversation of two people who had discovered they liked being in the same room, and found each other's thinking genuinely interesting, and trusted each other in the specific demonstrated way that trust operates when it has been tested by something real. The formal federal ruling came in November. Aldridge brought it himself, which told them something. He arrived on a Wednesday morning with a single deputy and the same leather case he had carried into the Ridgecrest courthouse 2 months before, and he sat at the kitchen table and opened the case and laid the document on the table in front of Clara. She read it. She read it completely from the first line to the last, and then she turned it over to see if there was anything on the back, which there was not, and then she set it face up on the table and put both hands flat beside it. "The Bennett water property and associated land parcels," Aldridge said, are formally restored to Clara Elaine Bennett as sole legal heir under the authenticated deed of 1861. All documents filed by Harrington Land Holdings Incorporated in relation to these properties have been ruled fraudulent and are struck from the county record." He paused. "Victor Harrington has been charged under federal land fraud statutes at 3 counts. His attorneys have begun negotiation for a settlement. We believe he will not go to trial." "He'll pay his way out," Wyatt said. "He'll pay significantly," Aldridge said. "The penalty structure on federal land fraud at 3 counts is not one that even Harrington's resources absorb easily. And the civil reclamation claims from the affected families," he looked at Clara, "which your documentation work made possible are going to cost him considerably more." Clara was still looking at the ruling document. "The Tanner family," she said. "Mineral Springs has been contacted," Aldridge said. "Their case is separate but related, and Cutter's testimony is central to it. It will take longer, but it will happen." Clara nodded. She looked at the document one more time. Then she picked it up and held it with the care she gave everything she considered valuable and irreplaceable, and she said to no one in particular, and to both of them at once, "I need to take this to the spring." Wyatt looked at her. "The upper spring," she said. "My father used to go up there to think. When something important happened, when something needed marking, he'd go up to the spring." She looked at the document in her hands. "I want to take this up there." Aldridge looked between them, with the expression of a man who understood that there were things happening in this room that were outside his jurisdiction. "I'll give you the morning," he said simply, and stood up and took his deputy and his leather case, and went outside to wait, which was Wyatt thought the single most graceful thing the man had done in an otherwise professional and excellent federal investigation. They walked up the trail to the spring, in the November cold, side by side without hurrying. Clara held the document and did not speak, and Wyatt walked beside her and did not speak either because some moments speak best into silence. At the spring she stood for a long time. She held the ruling in both hands and looked at the water coming out of the ground, cold and clear and steady. The same water, it had always been running the same course. It had always run entirely unaware of everything that had been done to keep it in the hands it belonged to. Wyatt stood beside her, close. The cold was sharp and clean. Their breath steamed in the air in the same direction. After a long time, Clara said, "He would have stood right here, exactly here." Her voice was quiet and full and steady in the way of something that has found its own level after a long turbulence. He would have read every word of this twice. He would have folded it very carefully and put it in his coat. And then he would have stood here for a while just being with it. "Like you're doing," Wyatt said. She looked at him. "Like I'm doing," she agreed. And then something released in her face, something that had been held and held through 9 days of running and 3 months of rebuilding, and she laughed. A real laugh, sudden and warm, and entirely unguarded. The laugh of a woman who has not laughed without reservation in a very long time, and is now doing it because she cannot help it and doesn't want to help it. "God, I'm exactly like him." "Yes," Wyatt said. "You say that like it's obvious." "It's obvious." She shook her head, still smiling, and looked back at the water. The smile did not leave her face. It settled into something quieter and more permanent. Not the bright burst of the laugh, but the thing underneath it, the thing the laugh had uncovered. "Stay for dinner tonight," she said. "Aldridge will want to talk through the next steps for the other families, and I want you there for that conversation." "All right," he said. "And—" She paused, looked at the water. "Stay after Aldridge leaves." She said it simply, without ceremony, the most direct thing she had ever said to him about anything that did not concern federal land fraud. "I make a better stew than Pratt, and I would like the company." Wyatt Callahan looked at this woman standing at her father's spring with a federal ruling in her hands and the particular expression of someone who has come through something enormous and is standing in what comes after it and is ready. Not in the easy, uncomplicated way of someone who has not paid the cost, but in the true way, the earned way, the way of someone who knows exactly what it cost and has decided it was worth paying. Yes, he said. One word. The same word he had been saying to her in various forms since the night he found her on a dirt floor in a dark cabin and decided without entirely knowing he was deciding to stay. She folded the ruling carefully and put it inside her coat. She turned from the spring. She looked at him with a directness that had always been there from the first night, but had changed in quality the way light changes in quality between morning and afternoon. While remaining light, the same essential thing arrived at a different angle, revealing different things. She began walking back down the trail. He walked beside her. Behind them, the spring ran on cold and clear and permanent, the way it had run for 100 years and would run for 100 more, indifferent to the human arguments conducted over it, but available generously and without prejudice to anyone who had the patience to follow it to its source. The cabin where Clara Bennett had begged a stranger not to leave her had been empty for months, collapsed into itself in the deep timber 9 miles from the North Ridge. But the house in the Elk Creek Basin had warm light in the windows by the time they came back down the trail, and Aldridge's horse was at the rail, and there was work still to do, and conversations still to have, and families still to help, and a case against Victor Harrington that was going to wind through federal channels for another year before it was done. And Wyatt Callahan, who had spent 12 years making himself small enough that losing things wouldn't break him, walked through the door of the Bennett house into the warmth and the light and the ordinary, irreplaceable sound of other people in a room, and understood at last that the walls a man builds to keep out pain, keep out everything else as well, and that the bravest thing he had done in all his years on the mountain was not the night he faced 2 armed men at his door, or the ride to the telegraph station with Cutter behind him, or the crossing of the ridge in the cold and the wind. The bravest thing he had done was stay, and he was not going anywhere.